Intellectual property is crucial, and the reason for this is in communications, in telecommunications, there is a lot of interdependency, a lot of interconnectivity. Everything has to work on the basis of using the same consistent technologies that can work with each other. So, when you're calling somebody, the person at the other end is able, or their device can actually interpret what your device has sent, and the network has to follow those same technologies as well. And so the technology is very much shared, so it's very collaborative. Those companies that develop the technology have to share it around with everybody, and so the investment that they make in that technology, the intellectual property that they have invested, is something that needs to be shared, and there needs to be fair compensation for those that make those investments. I think all the evidence is it's been very beneficial because in communications, in telecommunications, we can see some enormously fast-growing and vibrant markets with a lot of innovation. For example, with smartphones, over the last 7 or 8 years, now most phones sold are smartphones. They are very intellectual property rich, and the intellectual property protections that have been in the industry, for example, for the standards essential technologies that go into those smartphone devices, have fostered and enabled the development of the market. So there's, for example, about 45 to $50 billion a year in R&D investment made by I think that's about a dozen major players in the industry, and yet that technology is shared by hundreds of different companies that are implementing that technology, and of course billions of end users around the world who are benefiting from smartphone technologies and services. I think there are some great risks in messing around with a system that has proven to work extremely successfully. So the returns that can be obtained, for example, through patent licensing, have been part of the reason that R&D investment has been made. I mentioned the figure of $45 to $50 billion a year in R&D. Much of that is by players that no longer actually make smartphones or handset devices. They were companies that have developed the technologies and continue to develop the technologies, but no longer participate in the downstream markets of actually making handsets, for example. And I think the danger of weakening the intellectual property system is that they will not be able to get the same returns. They will be disincentivized from making the investments, taking the risks in R&D development. And there is also the possibility that they may be less willing or become reluctant to contribute so much of their technologies to the standards setting processes. So for example, years and years ago, decades ago, a lot of communications technologies were proprietary. And we moved away from that to a much more collaborative and standardized approach. I think one effect of weakening the intellectual property protections is that we could have a reversion to a more proprietary approach. And I think that would be disadvantageous for the industry and for the development of the marketplace generally. I think the system for intellectual property protection and licensing, for example, for the standards essential patents, through the principle of fair, reasonable and non-discriminatory licensing, has actually proven to work very successfully. And there are, however, pressures to adjust the system to, for example, make it much more difficult or even impossible to obtain injunctions, for example, which are fundamental to the patent system. And I think that kind of measure, also there are some steps to change the basis on which royalty rates are changed. These things, I think, are potentially very destabilizing and damaging to the system.